kulla. Alkus samegilli. Tige lekt kevahandan kuovlu ja tai ädmi. Mi byyte loppi pisanitas tan kokti päiv. Mi puhutti raafiin ja raksvuodaan ja loppi de kuolti samme tillis, teike puolet tillis, koda leikomi podiimet. In English. To those who have used this place and the surroundings, we will ask permission to stay here for these 2 days. We come in peace and love and promise to leave the place in the same or better condition it was when we arrived. Thank you. My name is Jan-Erik, Henriksen, and I will be the moderator of this session. Thank you for the invitation. I come from the Saami area's University of Tromsø, and is the leader of the Indigenous Voices Research Group, which is part of this session. I hope this will be what we call talking circle, and we want that you, the comments and questions can be raised after all the presentations. The main focus on this session is about co-creation research, and co-creation in what we call two-eye seeing. That means that we do this co-creation research and co-creation work, both with the one eye on the indigenous perspective and the indigenous knowledge, and the second eye on this scientific knowledge. And then we try to bring both of these knowledges together in our research. And we have some experiences with doing some of these, and some of this experience we will talk about during this session. Who are we? Yeah, I'm from the Arctic University of Norway, Indigenous Saami speaking. Then we also have 2 other indigenous representatives. One from Nunavut, which will come up to us during the screen. And then we also have Naja from Greenland. And also Aslak from the Saami Council, president of the Saami Council. And then we, of course, have our host, Research Institute for Sustainability from Potsdam, represented by Erin, Nina, and Anne. I think I handle the microphone to you, Anne. As a host, you will say more about this session.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan-Erik. A warm welcome from me as well. My name is Chahine. I'm a research associate at the RIFS, the Research Institute for Sustainability, Helmholtz Center Potsdam. And the only thing I wanted to add to Jan-Erik's introduction is, as this is a session about co-creation and different knowledge systems coming together, we thought it makes sense to share some of our principles we're working with. So you can see them up here on the screen. And you can also see them distributed around the room in form of a printout. And these are, of course, not extensive, and they have initially been created for a different setting as part of the communication protocols of the Co-Create Collaborative, a network of indigenous and non-indigenous partners, which many of us have been involved in. And the idea is that they'll give you a sense of how we imagine working together, and we invite you to keep them in mind when engaging with us, but also with each other during the next 60 minutes. And with this, we can actually directly start, and I would like to hand over to Naja.
My name is Naja. Naja in Greenlandic, Galaklisut, which means little sister to older brother, which I am. I was supposed to present together with Vivi Vold, who's my colleague right now. She's a guest in my postdoc project at Aarhus University. She's a PhD candidate at Ilisimatusarfik and an Inuk scholar, wonderful Inuk scholar. And unfortunately, she fell ill, so she couldn't be here today. But she sends her greetings, and I hope that I can present our work to the best of my ability. I myself am a Danish Kalaalleq Inuk postdoctoral researcher, and one of my major areas of research is the colonial relations between Denmark and Kalaallit Nunaat. I'm particularly engaged in decolonizing and indigenizing existing knowledge regimes on Danish colonization in Kalaallit Nunaat. And this research is inspired and informed by my own mixed background in Denmark and Kalaallit Nunaat. And it's situated in my in-between positionality, where I seek to navigate the privileges that I inhabit, as well as a Danish-speaking, white-coding, cisgendered woman, while I'm also a person who lives with the personal consequences of colonial legacies and the structural discrimination that Kalaallit diaspora in Denmark continue to experience. So what Vivi and I would like to contribute to this topic of sharing and caring today and our collaboration on co-creation is also to share some experiences and reflections of academic extractivism as it relates to Arctic research today and as it relates to us as Inuit scholars. Our work is less about defining what academic extractivism is, which we in some see as a term that denotes research that approaches knowledge and experience of indigenous, racialized, and other marginalized groups of people as something to be extracted, to be used, to be appropriated, and sometimes exploited with little or no consolidation with the communities involved, of those who hold the knowledge, and often for the benefit of those who extract the knowledge. But our work is more about attending to our own personal experiences as scholars in Western academic institutions and how it affects our daily lives as scholars. Still, it's important to note that academic extractivism originates in the colonial histories in the Arctic, and that the birth of the discipline of Arctic research is founded on colonial and extractivist relations. Since the mid-16th century, Inuit have been described, classified, and represented by mainly European white male polar explorers, scientists, tradesmen who've made Inuit the objects of scientific research. And my Saami fellows might share some of the same experiences, but this historiography is part of my work, and I've focused on Inuit in the Arctic and Inuit particularly in Kalaallit Nunaat. In these studies, Inuit peoples and lands were subjected to scientific and anthropological examinations, knowledge theft, artifacts, and even bodily remains from burial grounds got taken for ethnological collections in Europe. We were also subjected to unsanctioned experiments and racial measurements of craniums and so on. So these studies on Inuit have represented by Europeans and deeply racialized came to constitute many Arctic studies programs in European universities. In many ways, contemporary research practices reverberate some of these colonial histories. For example, when natural or social scientists fly in and out of Greenlandic communities to collect and extract data, but often with little consolidation with the locals. In Greenland, we call this hit-and-run research, or fly-in, fly-out. And we see a meme here by Lili Frederiksen-Kemnitz, who is a meme maker. She makes memes on different kinds of political issues, and she's represented this in a meme, which I guess you can make your own sense of. So So over the past couple of years, Vivi and I have had several conversations about how some of these extractivist dynamics play out in our everyday life and work life, interactions and research collaborations, and also in collaboration and conversation with many of our Galaslik peers. And we're noting that we share many of the same experiences and struggles. So we've started to write them down, and right now we're forming an article about some of these, because it's rather under-acknowledged and also under-documented that our daily lives and even our careers as Inuit scholars are deeply influenced by academic extractivism, and in very particular, but also in collective ways. And some of the recurrent characteristics of academic extractivism is noted here on the slide, though it's not an exhaustive list. On the right, you see like a response from me, it's in Danish, to a typical email where I'm asked to lecture for a group of people on the decolonization movement in Galaslik Nunad, and I've been asked to come and talk about it and educate a group of people, and I'm offered 2 bottles of wine. So in this email, I'm kindly responding that this is, I do not have time or energy to spend a whole day traveling across the country for 2 bottles of wine. And this is often, I think, what we call the double burden. It's the burden to have to educate people about the colonial history that's not in the Danish curriculum, which is actually a very taxing job. The historiography that I just shared with you is something that I've spent my time in academia to create because it didn't exist before. But often we're offered very little payment, and we are also not supported systemically. Another thing that Vivi and I both experience and observe is that the role of Galaslik Inuit scholars often is the role of us as Inuit scholars in larger research projects. We're often invited in as PhDs or postdocs because there's a need to have a Galaslik dimension, or there's a need for inclusion and diversity and participation. But often it becomes a legitimization of the overall project, of the research project, but it leaves us in assistantships or time-limited positions. So for the past 6 years, I've been jumping from postdoc to postdoc. So often we're not included in actually defining the research question, the scope, the methodology, and so on. Yeah, I could say more about extractivist data processing and analysis and how knowledge is often appropriated and dislocated of indigenous peoples in general, but I think we can talk more about that in the roundtable or in the conversation. But these are just some of the experiences that we're currently working on spelling out more. So while there's more and more focus on research for and by indigenous people, and there's a strong movement in Galaslik Nunad on nothing about us without us, our experiences in academia also reflect how academic extractivist tendencies continue to impede reciprocal research relations, indigenous, non-indigenous collaborations, and decolonial labor. Our stories also characterize systemic challenges that are often overlooked and not documented, but that are very present and embodied in the everyday life of indigenous scholars in European universities. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Evie. Yes, so yeah, thank you, Naja, for a great introduction to the topic that we'll be sharing you a bit more about. I will start with a bit of a provocative quote, not too different from what we heard from Naja. It's from late Erke and Antti Kadeketa, who was a salmon fisher from my region. Yeah, let's put the pretty picture on. This is from maybe 1 kilometer away from my home, which is in the river valley of Tietno, which is a big Atlantic salmon river. So Erke, and there was a salmon fisher, and he said about research that, quote, those who have learned from books have studied issues in school for a short time. Their knowledge is incomplete. Us, people of the river, have at least 1,000 years of experience. We know the river and the ways of the salmon. And I think this, that's the end of the quote. I think that resonates well with a lot of the critique that research has received over the years, especially in my region in Sápmi, but I guess it's quite common throughout the Saami territories. As Naja was describing this kind of, I guess another word for it, this parachute research, that people who come from outside our communities, they visit briefly, and they are presented as experts, while the expertise of those whose livelihood is rooted in the ecosystems and who spend their whole lives in the environment, learning about the nature, they are often excluded from what is known as science. So I've had the pleasure of working with together with some German and other international colleagues with a few projects revolving around decolonial perspectives to research. And while indigenous knowledge is nowadays on a declarational level recognized as equal to Western science, then there definitely are some structural and practical level challenges that exist in bringing that to the same level. So yeah, me and Evie will briefly share about some of the work we have done with indigenous knowledge and knowledge co-production on a structural and principal level. So yeah, over to you, Evie.
Thank you. So I'd like to tell you about one project in particular called Daavki, and that's the Saami word for bow. And this project aimed to bridge academic and indigenous knowledge systems, and it was funded by the BMUV. And it was developed by a group of indigenous and non-indigenous researchers who worked together for a few years on practical ways to address ethical concerns in Arctic research. And they developed Daavki together and wrote a proposal, and it created capacity to keep working on these issues together and also reflect internally on how this group of indigenous and non-indigenous researchers work together. We did several projects that I listed there, but Aslak and I are going to focus mainly on one, a policy brief we just released to the Ikaarvik for process. And it built on a prior work called the Roadmap to Decolonial Arctic Research, and that had a EU focus on some of these practical ways of addressing ethical concerns, and our policy brief is looking more at an international circum-Arctic level. So now we're just going to share some of the key messages in that document.
Yeah, and doing that in a few minutes, it's challenging. But yeah, some of the points we want to highlight is one that Arctic is indigenous homeland, and how knowledge is produced and what is being studied. They are questions of research policy, ethics, and methods. And as we've touched upon, we and our territories have been studied a lot. Mostly, or maybe not mostly, but a lot of research has been done to satisfy the curiosity of others, while we think that the research should be beneficial for the communities. And one principle is that indigenous knowledge is the property of those communities whose knowledge it is. And how and if these communities engaged in research, it's part of the self-determination of indigenous peoples. And some topics are not considered suitable for outside researchers, and some knowledge has value mainly because not everybody knows it. Like the best berry picking spot is not much use to you if it's announced in the local newspaper. So we call for full participation of indigenous peoples in Arctic research, both in funding structures and also related research-related decision-making in the Arctic. And we think there is a need for building capacity in institutions that are funding Arctic research regarding the ongoing legacy of colonialism as it's still present in the academic structures. We also highlight the need to strengthen our own capacity and our own institutions that work with indigenous knowledge. And we want to highlight methodologies as a key way of bringing indigenous knowledge and perspectives into knowledge production. And as you can see, we also touched upon ethics and research ethical guidelines, which are not existing in every in Arctic indigenous community. We talk about indigenous data sovereignty and how indigenous people should not be just the object of research, but the subject. So also highlighting that we have capable indigenous scholars and that indigenous people should be part of all the stages of the research project, from the planning to the gathering of the material to the analysis and so on. So yeah, very briefly, what I wanted to share.
And we also talked about how indigenous people's self-determination is crucial when setting research agendas. And part of that has to do with formalizing collaborations with things like permanent and paid positions for indigenous peoples and fairly compensating for their work in these projects. And also having co-equal participation in things like determining research objectives and needs and priorities, reviewing funding decisions, reviewing project proposals, things like that. And also supporting future cohorts of indigenous researchers by providing more opportunities for young indigenous peoples in these spaces that haven't been always safe for them. And we also looked at some sort of practical changes for funding to support co-creative and indigenous-led research, acknowledging that funders have a lot of power to make possible co-creative and indigenous-led research, but there's still several barriers preventing fully ethical and equitable relationships. So some examples are advertising funding calls well in advance or without deadlines, using simpler language, acknowledging the linguistic diversity of indigenous peoples, allowing that experts who don't have academic degrees to still apply for funding and take on leadership roles, and also ensuring that reporting requirements don't become a barrier for some indigenous organizations that might not have the capacity to do that in the same way. And also regarding timelines, funding more in advance and following the end of a project just to support relationship building and maintenance and proper storage and access to data and things like that. So I'm going to end there. There's a lot more details in our policy brief, and we do have some examples at the front. But yeah, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think we used the time that we were granted, so I guess we'll just say thank you. And we were told there is a button which releases fireworks, so I'll press it now. But thank you.
So the next presentation is about embodiment and co-creative research, and it's based on a joint paper that Jan-Erik, Nina, and our other Nina Hermansen are currently working on. So it's also the first time that we're trying to wrap our heads around it, and we're going to share it in this room. It will be presented by Nina Döring, myself, and Nina Hermansen, who couldn't be here today, but she presented a small video for us. And we'll just start with that, and then myself and Nina, we're going to continue the story of Nina.
Våra baby buhkaide. My name is Nina Hermansen, and I'm a researcher from the Indigenous Voices group at the UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. I want to tell a little story from a morning session at the co-creative workshop in Vienna in 2023. My story is about reclaiming the body in co-creation. Seated in a circle at the university, getting ready to create our research community together, I asked myself, how can the chairs become comfortable for everyone in the room? When we arrived at the university that Monday morning, we were in a good mood, laughing and talking about what we observed walking over from the hotel to the university. This was after spending a weekend together, workshopping around Vienna's cafes and museums. We continued talking and laughing while preparing for our session together by fixing coffee, snacks, and rearranging the chairs in the room, moving the chairs into a circle. Jan-Erik, as our elder, did a welcome ceremony with us as a group, and we did some bodily exercises in the circle. For example, stretching our hands towards each other up in the air. That morning, we shared stories with each other by bringing a physical item, stories about our previous experience in the field. Mine was an artistic postcard from a project about midwives and birth stories in the north of Saami, and how it all started out for me with an Indigenous student exchange in Aotearoa, New Zealand, back in the days. We also closed our eyes with an orange in our lap, touching the orange with our hands, and when opening our eyes, we started sharing orange memories with the person next to us. It was so interesting. You wouldn't believe the exotic memories people have about oranges. Then we started working together to co-create together. My little story is about reclaiming the significance of embodiment in a co-creative group with Indigenous and non-Indigenous researchers. We kind of did the opposite of what Sara Ahmed writes about in her texts concerning embodiment and discomfort, and how marginalization is reinforced through everyday practices and interactions. My story doesn't end today, but makes a pause and raises some questions. How can we become comfortable in our chairs in the circle? How can the embodiment perspective advance co-creation in the Indigenous research? And what can it tell us about the power dynamics between us as research partners? Thank you.
And with this, I would like to continue Nina's story. As mentioned before, my name is Chahine, and I'm actually quite happy that we're meeting today in Berlin, because this is, I was born and grew up very close from here in a small city just south of Berlin, which used to belong to the German Democratic Republic. And I'm here today in my role as a research associate working at the RIFS, together with Nina and Evie. And I'll be reading for you a short essay about my own embodied experience from our co-create workshop in Vienna, together with Jan-Erik and Evie and almost everyone here on stage, actually. And the piece is called The Hallway. Our bodies move slowly through the hallway of the university building. It is a narrow space in front of the room we have been occupying for the last couple of days. As part of the workshop, we are asked to stretch our bodies, aching bodies that hurt from too much sitting, from neglecting what human bodies do best, to move, to feel, to sense, to actively engage with the environment around them. I realize that I haven't seen the sun since my morning walk to this very building in the center of Vienna. I crane my head, looking left and right. Further down, I recognize a sliver of light. A door of an adjacent room is open, and rays of sunlight hit the linoleum floor. What would I give to warm my face in the sun? I bring myself back to my colleagues around me, moving with me through this enclosed space. Having to move my body feels different from how I usually converse with my colleagues. It is a different kind of connection. There is a push and pull between bodies moving through the narrow space of the hallway, trying not to bump into each other, respecting different levels of comfort, but also wanting to use this moment to connect, maybe to signal, I'm here with you. I'm here with you in this hallway, in this workshop, in this space of exchange and learning. And I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your presence. I appreciate you taking the time to be here with me in the first place. I wish for this moment to not be an exception for how we make space for each other and how we communicate. I wish that we, as humans, as academics, as thinkers, as practitioners, will relearn to use our bodies and consider ourselves to be composed of mind and body. I wish that we would move around all day, deeply engaged in discussions that arise naturally when moving and talking at the same time, and that we would only pause for brief moments to sit and rest, and then communicate in silence together.
Thank you for sharing your story, Anne, and thoughts, Nina. As mentioned, my name is also Nina Döring, and I'm originally from the south of Germany, but I now live in Potsdam. I'm the last representative of RIFS here in this room today. And I want to reflect on what Nina and Anne just shared as an illustration of how we have worked together over the past year. After this workshop that brought us all together in Vienna, Jan-Erik, Anne, Nina, and I started to exchange thoughts and readings and experiences in a shared document, and we've been reflecting together in online meetings, and we've now started to co-write a paper that engages with embodiment in co-creative research. My own positionality in this work is of a white German researcher working in a German research institute, and I'm going to share two key lessons that I've learned from it. First, that collectively creating spaces in which we can come together as full human beings, as Anne and Nina just shared, is possible. Spaces that allow us to acknowledge and to address our human experiences as beings with bodies and histories that are always connected with each other and with our environments. But, and this is my second point, creating these spaces requires work and also an openness to go against the pressures of our Western academic system, which is defined by inequalities and exploitation, as Naja has also just illustrated. I believe that an important part of my work as a German researcher in our collaboration is to turn around and address the system in our German institutions, which have provided me with a lot of privileges, but in the end, and in very different ways, ultimately do fail us all. In the paper by Sarah Ahmed that Nina just referred to, Ahmed reminds us that histories are bodily and that our bodies have histories. Bell Hooks has stressed that the erasure of the body encourages us to think that we are listening to neutral, objective facts, facts that are not particular to who is sharing the information. And that is something that our academic system often teaches us to do. But by explicitly addressing or tending to the relationships that we build with each other as embodied beings with bodies and histories, with feelings and emotions and relationships and spiritualities, we may gain a more nuanced understanding of what it means to co-create without glossing over power dynamics and structural inequalities and colonial presence. and it may allow us to work against exploitations and towards practices of care in our joint research processes. And I'm really grateful for everything that's already been shared in this session in moving toward that direction. And with that, I'm going to hand over to our next two speakers who cannot be here in person and are joining us from Nunavut in a video message.
Hello from Nunavut. Thank you for our team members that have already spoken. My name is Michael Milton, and I'm an Inuk from Pond Inlet, Nunavut, on the north part of Baffin Island. I'm the community coordinator for Ikaarvik in Pond Inlet, and what Ikaarvik is a small nonprofit organization that means bridge in Inuktitut, and it's where we get Southern researchers and Northern Indigenous youth to come together to create better, more meaningfully engaged research that benefit everyone.
My name is Shelly Elverum, and I'm Ikaarvik's Community Engagement and Research Support. And like many of you in this room, I am a non-Indigenous person who is lucky enough to be learning what it means to actually do the right and proper thing when trying to do research with Indigenous Northerners. What I've observed over the last 20 years of living in Nunavut is that research for the most part consists of really great, passionate people who want to work in the right way and have been told to engage communities and incorporate Indigenous knowledge, but often haven't been told how to do that or what that actually looks like. And so the work that we do with Ikaarvik is to try to demystify what does it actually mean from a Northern Indigenous perspective to engage and co-create and collaborate and incorporate Indigenous knowledge. So we are here to help you.
And to help you with that, we created what we call SciQ, which is a combination of science and IQ. IQ meaning Inuit Kayume Tokangi, which are Inuit guiding principles that determine our values on life. And we put them together and created guidelines with the help of Ikaarvik youth from 4 different communities in Nunavut. And together in 2018, we came up with over 40 recommendations on how to meaningfully engage with Northern Indigenous communities before, during, and after, as well as other extra recommendations to make your research better. SciQ has been a great resource for researchers that want to work better with Northern Indigenous partners.
Now, SciQ isn't like a checkbox. You don't just take it and go check, check, check. Cool, now I can work with Indigenous people. These recommendations were really carefully thought out as to ways to build relationships. And I think if there's anything that we'd like you to take away from these presentations, it's that you have to build a relationship first. You can't just walk in and say, great, I've got good intentions, so I'm going to now engage communities and incorporate your knowledge. It's all about the relationship. And in spite of this great SciQ work that the youth have done, we found that there was still an incredible demand from outside researchers seeking advice on what it means to actually engage with communities and how to set up co-created research projects. We're now in the process of developing a framework based on the idea of sewing mittens that will both guide researchers to how to take those first steps in creating the relationships, to actually co-create and collaborate in a way that is mutually agreed on as being successful, as well as reducing the stress that occurs in these small remote communities where there's limited capacity to actually help individual researchers and respond to the request of researchers for assistance. So what we're hoping we can do is provide really simple, easy to understand advice for researchers on what communities mean when they say, we want to partner with you and we would like to co-create research.
And so ultimately there's a lot of information out there already, but in the end, it's up to you to reach out and build relationships with the communities, the people, the regions that you are working with to benefit everyone.
And why does it matter? Well, I guess you could look at it, very strategically. If you're doing Arctic research, you genuinely care about what's happening in the Arctic. Whether you're studying rocks or reindeer or seals or lichen, you want to do the best job possible and you want your research to be meaningful. The best way to do that is work with the people who are the original scientists in the Arctic, and that is the Indigenous people. And if you truly, truly want to do this in the right way, and you want to do research that's more efficient and more effective, ultimately what you're going to be doing is co-creating research that will provide the best, most timely information that the world so desperately needs right now. So on behalf of Ikaarvik, we'd like to thank you. And you can get in touch with us at www.ikaarvik.org. And that's also where you'll find the SciQ recommendations.
Thank you. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you to the host that letting us share through the net, because the Arctic is huge and it's quite expensive to travel in the Arctic. So bringing also the perspective from Nunavut. So thank you. Thank you for coming, listening, sharing. We don't want to steal your time, your coffee time. So thank you for coming.